Marcus Johnson lived a simple yet fulfilling life in the heart of his small, tight-knit community. He was a man who believed in hard work, honesty, and helping others. Every morning, he woke up early to head to his job at the local auto repair shop, where he had earned a reputation for being trustworthy and skilled. After work, Marcus would rush home to spend time with his wife, Alina, and their two young children. His weekends were often spent coaching his son's Little League team or volunteering at the community center. To those who knew him, Marcus was the kind of person you could always count on, someone who lit up every room he entered. But one cold winter evening, everything changed in an instant. As Marcus drove home from work, he noticed flashing police lights ahead. A store nearby had been robbed, and chaos filled the air. Unbeknownst to him, this seemingly ordinary night would become the beginning of a nightmare. Within hours, Marcus found himself sitting in an interrogation room, accused of committing the very crime he had only heard about moments earlier. The police claimed they had evidence tying him to the scene, a vague description from a witness, and a grainy photo that barely resembled him. At first, Marcus thought it was all a misunderstanding. He calmly explained that he had been at the repair shop until late, finishing a car repair for a customer. His boss and a coworker confirmed his alibi, and several neighbors saw him leave the shop around the time the robbery occurred. But none of that mattered. The prosecution painted a different picture, twisting facts and ignoring inconsistencies. They argued that Marcus fit the profile of someone capable of such a crime, subtly playing on racial stereotypes to sway the jury. Despite Alina's desperate pleas and tears during the trial, the courtroom remained indifferent. Judge Richard Holloway presided over the case. Known for his stern demeanor and no-nonsense approach, he rarely showed emotion in court. When it came time to deliver the sentence, Marcus stood tall, hoping against hope that justice would prevail. But instead of freedom, Judge Holloway handed down a crushing 60-year prison term without the possibility of parole. The gavel's echo felt like a death knell to Marcus and his family. Shock and disbelief washed over them as they realized the enormity of what had just happened. How could this be? How could an innocent man be sentenced so harshly? As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, Alina collapsed into sobs, clutching their children close. Their once happy home now felt empty and broken. Friends and neighbors tried to offer support, but nothing could soften the blow of losing Marcus to a system that seemed determined to fail him. For Marcus, the world outside the prison walls faded quickly. Bars replaced windows, and silence replaced laughter. Each day stretched endlessly, filled with questions he couldn't answer. Why me? What did I do wrong? And most painfully, will anyone ever believe I'm innocent? Little did Marcus know, however, that far away from the confines of his cell, another story was beginning to unfold, one that might hold the key to setting him free. Meanwhile, Judge Holloway, whose decision had sealed Marcus's fate, began to feel an unfamiliar weight pressing on his shoulders. Guilt gnawed at him, though he tried to push it aside. Something about Marcus's calm resolve during the trial lingered in the judge's mind, refusing to let go. It was as if the truth itself was waiting patiently, biding its time, ready to reveal the shocking reality that neither Marcus nor Judge Holloway could have imagined. Life inside the prison walls was nothing like Marcus had ever imagined. The once vibrant man who used to fix cars with a smile and coach kids on the baseball field now found himself trapped in a world of cold concrete and iron bars. Days blended into nights, marked only by the clanging of heavy doors and the distant hum of fluorescent lights that never turned off. For Marcus, every waking moment was a test of endurance, a battle against despair, anger, and the overwhelming sense that his life had been stolen from him. The other inmates weren't easy to deal with either. Some were hardened criminals who didn't take kindly to newcomers. Others saw Marcus as an easy target because of his quiet demeanor and refusal to fight back. He learned quickly how to keep his head down, avoiding trouble whenever possible. But even then, there were moments when tension boiled over. Shouting matches in the rec yard, scuffles in the cafeteria, or late-night arguments echoing through the cell block. Each incident reminded Marcus of just how fragile safety could be behind those walls. What hurt most, though, was the separation from his family. Phone calls were rare and expensive, limited to brief conversations where he tried to sound strong for Alina and the kids. Hearing his daughter ask, "Daddy, when are you coming home?" nearly broke him every time. Letters arrived sporadically, filled with updates about birthdays, school projects, and holidays he couldn't attend. Reading them brought both comfort and pain, as they painted a picture of a life moving forward without him. Elena visited whenever she could, but the long drives and strict visiting rules made it difficult. Seeing her through thick glass, unable to hug her or hold his children, left Marcus feeling more alone than ever. Despite everything, Marcus refused to give up. Deep down, he held on to hope that the truth would eventually come out. He spent hours writing letters to lawyers, journalists, and anyone else he thought might help. He poured his heart into each appeal, detailing his innocence and begging for someone to listen. But rejection after rejection wore him down. Filing cabinets full of legal jargon became his only companions, and each denial felt like another nail in the coffin of his freedom. Meanwhile, outside the prison, Judge Richard Holloway couldn't shake the image of Marcus standing in court the day of sentencing. There had been something unsettling about the way Marcus looked at him, not with anger or defiance, but with calm resignation, as if he knew the system had already decided his fate. That memory haunted the judge during sleepless nights. It replayed in his mind like a broken record, accompanied by questions he couldn't ignore. Had he done enough to ensure justice? Was there more he should have questioned before handing down such a severe sentence? One evening, while sifting through old case files at home, Judge Holloway stumbled upon something that caught his attention. It was a report detailing a string of similar crimes committed around the same time as the one Marcus was accused of. The details matched almost perfectly, right down to the type of weapon used and the method of escape. What struck the judge most was the name linked to these crimes: Derek Duke Thompson, a known gang member with a history of violent offenses. Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. Could Duke have been the real culprit? And if so, why hadn't this connection come to light during the trial? The discovery gnawed at Judge Holloway's conscience. He knew he couldn't undo what had already been done, but the possibility that an innocent man was rotting in prison weighed heavily on him. As days passed, the judge wrestled with his thoughts, torn between fear of exposure and a growing desire to uncover the truth. Somewhere deep inside, he realized that Marcus's story wasn't just about one man. It was about fairness, accountability, and whether the justice system truly served the people it claimed to protect. Judge Richard Holloway had always prided himself on being a man of logic and discipline. His courtroom was known for its strict adherence to rules, and he believed deeply in the idea that justice should be blind, impartial, and fair to all. But as he sat alone in his dimly lit study one quiet evening, surrounded by stacks of old case files, doubt crept into his mind like an unwelcome guest. The face of Marcus Johnson kept appearing in his thoughts, unshakable and haunting. There was something about the calmness in Marcus's eyes during the trial that lingered with him, a look that seemed to say, "You're making a mistake." It started innocently enough. Judge Holloway had been reviewing past cases as part of a routine self-assessment, a habit he'd developed over the years to ensure his decisions stood up to scrutiny. As he flipped through the pages of unrelated files, one particular report caught his attention. It detailed a string of robberies that bore striking similarities to the crime Marcus had been convicted of. Each incident involved a bold entry, a specific type of weapon, and a swift getaway on foot. The descriptions were eerily familiar, but what truly stood out was the name mentioned repeatedly in connection with these crimes: Derek Duke Thompson. Duke was no stranger to law enforcement. A notorious gang member with a lengthy rap sheet, he had evaded capture for years despite numerous allegations against him. Judge Holloway remembered hearing whispers about Duke's influence within certain circles, including rumors of ties to corrupt officers who helped cover his tracks. At the time, Those rumors hadn't mattered much to the judge. He dismissed them as hearsay. But now, staring at this file, he couldn't ignore the glaring parallels between Duke's methods and the details of Marcus's alleged crime. The more Judge Holloway read, the more uneasy he became. He recalled how flimsy the evidence against Marcus had been. A vague description from a traumatized witness, grainy footage that never clearly showed the perpetrator's face, and circumstantial links that barely held water. Yet, somehow, it had all added up to a guilty verdict. Now, with Duke's name staring back at him, the judge began to wonder if someone had deliberately steered investigators away from the real culprit. Was it possible that Marcus had been framed? And if so, why? His curiosity turned into obsession. Over the next few days, Judge Holloway found himself digging deeper, pulling late nights to comb through archived records and news articles. He reached out discreetly to retired detectives who had worked on similar cases, asking casual questions under the guise of general interest. Slowly, fragments of information began to surface, details that didn't make sense unless viewed through the lens of corruption. One detective hinted that key pieces of evidence in Marcus's case had mysteriously vanished before trial, including a security camera tape that could have exonerated him. Another mentioned pressure from higher-ups to close the case quickly, even if it meant cutting corners. As the puzzle pieces came together, Judge Holloway felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had always trusted the system he served, believing it to be fundamentally sound. But now, faced with the possibility that Marcus might be innocent, the cracks in that foundation became impossible to ignore. Every instinct told him to stop, to leave well enough alone and protect his reputation. After all, admitting fault would mean exposing not only himself, but also the flaws in the very institution he represented. Yet there was another voice inside him, quieter but persistent. It reminded him of the oath he took when he became a judge, an oath to uphold justice above all else. If Marcus Johnson was truly innocent, then letting him rot in prison wasn't just a failure of the system. It was a betrayal of everything Judge Holloway claimed to stand for. The weight of this realization pressed down on him, forcing him to confront a choice he never expected to face. Should he stay silent and preserve his legacy, or risk everything to uncover the truth? For the first time in his career, Judge Holloway felt unsure of what justice really meant, and whether he had the courage to pursue it. Judge Richard Holloway knew he was stepping into dangerous territory. The deeper he delved into Marcus Johnson's case, the more he realized that uncovering the truth wouldn't just challenge his own conscience. It could unravel a web of corruption that reached far beyond what he had imagined. But something inside him refused to let go. He couldn't ignore the growing pile of evidence pointing to Derek Duke Thompson as the real culprit, nor could he shake the image of Marcus standing calmly in court, accepting his unjust sentence without bitterness or rage. Holloway decided to take matters into his own hands, but cautiously. He couldn't risk drawing attention to himself or appearing biased, so he worked discreetly, piecing together clues like a detective in the shadows. His first step was reaching out to retired detectives who had once investigated crimes linked to Duke. These men and women were no longer bound by departmental loyalty, and some were eager to share their frustrations about cases they believed had been mishandled. One former officer, a grizzled man named Tom Grayson, confirmed what Holloway feared most. Duke had powerful allies within the police force, people who ensured his name stayed out of reports and his actions went unpunished. "The guy's untouchable," Tom said during a quiet phone call. "We get leads on him all the time. Witness statements, fingerprints, even video footage. But somehow it always disappeared before it got anywhere near a courtroom." This revelation sent chills down Holloway's spine. If true, it meant that Marcus's conviction wasn't just a mistake. It was part of a deliberate effort to protect someone else. Holloway pushed further, asking Tom if there were any surviving records from around the time of Marcus's arrest. To his surprise, Tom mentioned an old storage unit where unfiled evidence sometimes ended up, a kind of purgatory for inconvenient truths. Though skeptical, Holloway made arrangements to visit the location under the pretense of conducting research for a book project. What he found there shocked him. Buried beneath dusty boxes and forgotten files was a folder labeled Robbery Task Force, 2015. Inside, he discovered fragments of evidence that should have exonerated Marcus years ago. Witness statements describing a suspect who didn't match Marcus's appearance, receipts placing Duke near the crime scene, and most damning of all, a handwritten note from an officer warning that the case against Marcus was weak at best. It was clear someone had gone to great lengths to bury this information. But the biggest breakthrough came when Holloway stumbled upon a fragment of surveillance footage. Though incomplete, it showed a figure fleeing the scene of the robbery. Even through the grainy resolution, the person bore little resemblance to Marcus. Instead, the build, gait, and clothing matched descriptions of Duke Thompson. For Holloway, this was the smoking gun he needed, not just to prove Marcus's innocence, but to expose the rot festering within the justice system. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Holloway faced another dilemma: how to act without implicating himself. After much deliberation, he decided to reach out to Elena Johnson, Marcus's wife. He couldn't reveal his identity directly. It would raise too many questions, so he crafted an anonymous letter. In it, he urged her to investigate Duke Thompson and provided enough details to guide her legal team toward the truth. Signing off simply as a friend, Holloway mailed the letter, hoping it would spark the chain reaction needed to free Marcus. In the days that followed, Holloway wrestled with guilt and fear. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, one that could cost him everything if exposed. Yet, for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope, not just for Marcus, but for the possibility of redemption. Somewhere deep inside, he understood that seeking justice wasn't just about fixing past mistakes. It was about proving that even those entrusted with power could admit when they were wrong. And perhaps in doing so, they could inspire others to do the same. As the wheels of change began to turn, Judge Holloway braced himself for what lay ahead. Whether it led to triumph or ruin, one thing was certain. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and its arrival would change lives forever. Elena Johnson received the anonymous letter on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. At first, she thought it was just another scam or junk mail, the kind of thing people got all the time and threw away without a second glance. But something about the handwriting caught her attention. It was neat yet urgent, as if the writer had been careful to sound professional while hiding their identity. The words inside were even more startling. "Your husband is innocent. Look into Derek Duke Thompson. He's the key to proving it." For a moment, Elena sat frozen at her kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands. She had spent 8 long years fighting for Marcus's freedom, exhausting every legal avenue, only to hit dead ends. Each rejection felt like a punch to the gut, leaving her drained and hopeless. But this was different. Whoever wrote the letter seemed to know things they shouldn't, offering specific details about evidence that had gone missing and pointing directly to Duke Thompson as the real culprit. Could it be true? Or was this some cruel prank meant to toy with her emotions? Despite her doubts, Elena couldn't ignore the possibility. Deep down, she still believed in Marcus's innocence with every fiber of her being, even when the world told her otherwise. That belief had kept her going through sleepless nights, court hearings, and endless appeals. Now, armed with new information, she decided to take one last shot. She reached out to Sarah Myers, a civil rights attorney known for taking on impossible cases. Sarah agreed to meet with Elena after hearing her story, though she warned that reopening a closed case would be an uphill battle. When Elena handed over the anonymous letter along with copies of the fragmented evidence Judge Holloway had uncovered, Sarah's eyes widened. This changes everything," she said quietly, flipping through the documents. For the first time in years, Elena allowed herself to feel a spark of hope. With Sarah leading the charge, they filed a motion to reopen Marcus's case, citing newly discovered evidence and allegations of misconduct by law enforcement. The legal process moved slowly, but behind the scenes, momentum began to build. Sarah and her team tracked down witnesses who had been ignored during the original trial, including store employees who now admitted they'd seen someone matching Duke's description fleeing the scene. They also uncovered internal memos from the police department revealing orders to prioritize Marcus as the suspect, despite weak evidence. Meanwhile, reporters picked up on the story, shining a spotlight on the potential miscarriage of justice. Public pressure mounted, forcing authorities to take action. As the investigation expanded, Duke Thompson became increasingly nervous. Known for his temper and connections, he tried to intimidate anyone who dared speak against him. But fear can only silence people for so long. One witness, a former gang associate named Calvin, finally broke under the weight of guilt and agreed to testify. In exchange for immunity, Calvin revealed how Duke orchestrated the robbery and later framed Marcus by bribing corrupt officers to suppress exonerating evidence. Back at the courthouse, Judge Holloway watched from afar as the pieces fell into place. He knew he couldn't reveal his role in uncovering the truth, not yet. Doing so would expose his own complicity in sentencing an innocent man and risk destroying whatever progress had been made. So he stayed silent, wrestling with guilt and praying that justice would prevail. Finally, the day came when Marcus's case was brought before a judge once again. This time, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Friends, family, and supporters packed the benches, holding their breath as Sarah presented the overwhelming evidence proving Marcus's innocence. When the judge announced that Marcus's conviction would be overturned, the room erupted in cheers. Tears streamed down Alina's face as she clutched her children tightly, knowing their father was coming home. But even as joy filled the air, Judge Holloway remained haunted. He had helped set the wheels of justice in motion, but he knew his journey wasn't over. The system he served was broken, and fixing it would require courage, not just from him, but from everyone willing to confront uncomfortable truths. As Marcus walked out of prison a free man, Holloway vowed to dedicate himself to ensuring no one else suffered the same fate. Redemption, he realized, wasn't just about undoing wrongs. It was about building a better future, and for the first time in years, he felt ready to try. The courtroom was electric with tension as Marcus Johnson stood before the judge, his hands trembling but his eyes steady. For 8 long years, he had dreamed of this moment. Freedom within reach, truth finally surfacing. Sarah Myers, his attorney, laid out the evidence piece by piece. Witness testimonies ignored during the original trial, internal memos exposing police misconduct, and Calvin's explosive confession about Duke Thompson's role in framing Marcus. Each revelation sent shockwaves through the room, forcing even the most skeptical observers to confront the ugly reality of what had happened. Derek Duke Thompson, however, wasn't going down without a fight. When investigators brought him in for questioning, he swaggered into the interrogation room with the same arrogance that had kept him out of trouble for years. Dressed in designer clothes and flashing a cocky grin, Duke seemed untouchable. But this time was different. With mounting pressure from public outrage and undeniable evidence stacked against him, his bravado began to crack. At first, Duke denied everything, insisting he had nothing to do with the robbery or Marcus's conviction. But when detectives presented Calvin's testimony alongside bank records showing payments to corrupt officers, Duke's confidence wavered. The final blow came when they showed him the fragment of surveillance footage Judge Holloway had uncovered, the one capturing a figure matching his description fleeing the scene. Realizing the walls were closing in, Duke caved under interrogation. He admitted not only to committing the crime, but also to orchestrating Marcus's arrest, paying off key players to bury exonerating evidence and pin the blame on an innocent man. The confession sent shockwaves through the community. News outlets scrambled to cover the unfolding scandal, airing interviews with experts who called it one of the most egregious examples of judicial corruption in recent history. Reporters dug deeper, uncovering other cases where Duke had avoided accountability thanks to his network of bribes and intimidation. The spotlight turned harshly on the justice system itself, raising uncomfortable questions about bias, oversight, and the ease with which power could be abused. Amid the chaos, Judge Richard Holloway found himself at the center of scrutiny. Whispers circulated about his possible involvement in uncovering the truth. How else could such damning evidence have surfaced after so many years? Some accused him of trying to salvage his reputation. Others praised him for taking responsibility. Though he couldn't reveal his role publicly without risking further complications, Holloway knew his actions would eventually come to light. For now, he watched silently as the case dominated headlines, feeling both relief and unease. Marcus, meanwhile, struggled to process the whirlwind of emotions surrounding his release. On one hand, he felt overwhelming gratitude to Elena, who never gave up, to Sarah, who fought tirelessly, and to whoever had sent that anonymous letter that sparked the investigation. On the other hand, bitterness lingered. 8 years of his life had been stolen, and no amount of vindication could erase the pain of those lost days. Yet, as he walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, greeted by cheers from friends, family, and strangers alike, Marcus chose to focus on hope rather than resentment. Elena rushed to him, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him tightly. Their children clung to him, laughing and crying all at once. It was a scene straight out of a dream. One Marcus had almost stopped believing could come true. Cameras flashed around them, capturing the emotional reunion, but none of it mattered compared to the warmth of being together again. As Marcus embraced his family, Judge Holloway stood nearby, observing from a distance. His heart swelled with conflicting emotions. Pride in helping right a terrible wrong, shame for his part in perpetuating it, and determination to ensure something like this never happened again. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, not for Marcus, not for the justice system, and certainly not for himself. But for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that change was possible. Redemption wasn't just a word, it was an action, a choice to keep moving forward despite past failures. And so, as Marcus stepped into his new chapter of freedom, Judge Holloway resolved to step into his own, a journey of accountability, advocacy, and rebuilding trust in a broken system. Together, though worlds apart, their stories intertwined, proving that even in the darkest moments, the pursuit of truth can lead to transformation. Marcus Johnson's release from prison marked the beginning of a new chapter, but it wasn't without its challenges. Stepping back into a world that had moved on without him felt surreal. The streets looked the same, yet everything seemed foreign. His children were taller, their voices deeper. Elena carried lines on her face that hadn't been there before. Even simple tasks like using a smartphone or navigating online banking left him feeling out of place. But through it all, Marcus held on to one truth: he was free. And with freedom came a chance to rebuild, not just his life, but also his purpose. Determined to turn his pain into something meaningful, Marcus became an advocate for the wrongfully convicted. He shared his story at community events, schools, and rallies, speaking candidly about the flaws in the justice system that had nearly destroyed him. His words resonated deeply with audiences, especially those who had lost faith in fairness. "I'm not just fighting for myself," he often said. "I'm fighting for everyone who doesn't have a voice." Slowly, Marcus transformed his trauma into a mission, inspiring others to join the cause. Meanwhile, Judge Richard Holloway faced his own reckoning. The public eventually learned of his role in uncovering the truth, thanks to anonymous leaks detailing his secret investigation. While some praised him as a hero willing to admit his mistakes, others condemned him for waiting so long to act. Protesters gathered outside his home, holding signs that read "Justice delayed is justice denied." Reporters hounded him for interviews, eager to dissect his motivations. Through it all, Holloway remained stoic, knowing he deserved both criticism and credit for what he had done. In a bold move, Holloway resigned from his position as a judge, citing the need for accountability and reform within the justice system. "I sentenced an innocent man to 60 years in prison," he admitted during a press conference, his voice trembling with emotion. "That is a failure I will carry with me for the rest of my life." But if my actions can help prevent others from suffering the same fate, then perhaps there is still hope for redemption, for me and for the system itself. Holloway dedicated himself to criminal justice reform, partnering with grassroots organizations and advocacy groups. Together, they pushed for policies aimed at increasing transparency, eliminating racial bias, and ensuring proper oversight of law enforcement. Holloway's insider perspective gave him unique credibility, allowing him to bridge gaps between lawmakers, activists, and communities affected by systemic injustice. Though some dismissed him as a hypocrite seeking redemption, many recognized his efforts as genuine attempts to make amends. The fallout from Duke Thompson's confession continued to ripple across the city. Several corrupt officers were arrested, while others resigned in disgrace. Internal investigations exposed widespread misconduct, prompting calls for sweeping changes within the police department. Community leaders demanded greater accountability, organizing marches and town halls to amplify their voices. For once, it seemed, people were listening. As Marcus and Holloway worked separately toward similar goals, their paths crossed unexpectedly at a forum on wrongful convictions. Both men were invited to speak, sharing their perspectives on how the justice system failed and how it could be fixed. When Holloway took the stage, he looked directly at Marcus and publicly apologized, his voice heavy with remorse. "I failed you," he said, "but I promise to spend the rest of my life working to ensure no one else suffers as you did." The audience erupted in applause, but Marcus simply nodded, accepting the apology with quiet dignity. After the event, the two men spoke privately for the first time. They didn't exchange pleasantries or dwell on the past. Instead, they discussed ways to collaborate, uniting their efforts to create lasting change. It was an unlikely partnership, born out of tragedy, but rooted in a shared vision for a better future. By coming together, Marcus and Holloway proved that even the deepest wounds could become catalysts for healing. Their journey showed that justice wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about lifting up the innocent, confronting uncomfortable truths, and building bridges where none existed before. Together, they reminded the world that redemption wasn't reserved for perfect people. It belonged to anyone brave enough to try. Marcus Johnson's journey from prisoner to advocate became a beacon of hope for countless others trapped in the shadows of injustice. His story spread far beyond his small town, capturing national attention and sparking conversations about systemic flaws in the justice system. People began to see him not just as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, a man who refused to let bitterness define him. Instead, he channeled his pain into action, traveling across the country to speak at conferences, universities, and legislative hearings. His voice carried weight because it came from experience, and his message was clear. The system isn't broken. It was designed this way, but we have the power to redesign it. Elena stood by his side throughout this transformation, her unwavering support a testament to their unbreakable bond. Together, they rebuilt their family, rediscovering joy in everyday moments that had once seemed impossible. Their children flourished under Marcus's guidance, proud of the work their father was doing to help others. Though scars remained, sleepless nights haunted by memories of prison and moments when anger threatened to surface, Marcus chose to focus on gratitude. He often reminded himself that freedom wasn't just physical, it was also emotional, a choice to rise above the past. Judge Richard Holloway, too, found purpose in his new role as a reform advocate. His decision to step down from the bench opened doors he never imagined. By sharing his story publicly, he humanized the struggle for accountability within the justice system. At first, skepticism followed him everywhere. Activists questioned his intentions, while former colleagues accused him of betrayal. But over time, his consistent efforts earned trust. He worked tirelessly to draft legislation aimed at reducing wrongful convictions, implementing stricter rules for evidence handling, and creating independent oversight boards to monitor police conduct. One of Holloway's proudest achievements came when lawmakers passed the Justice Accountability Act, a landmark bill inspired by Marcus's case. The act mandated body cameras for all law enforcement officers, required regular audits of evidence storage facilities, and provided funding for legal teams representing the wrongfully convicted. When Marcus joined Holloway on stage at the signing ceremony, the two men shared a moment of quiet understanding. They had come so far, from courtroom adversaries to allies united by a common goal. Their partnership extended beyond policy changes. Together, they founded an organization called Pathways to Justice, dedicated to supporting exonerees and preventing future injustices. The group offered resources like job training, mental health counseling, and housing assistance to those rebuilding their lives after incarceration. It also created educational programs for students, teaching them about civic responsibility and the importance of holding institutions accountable. Through these efforts, Marcus and Holloway transformed personal tragedy into a movement that touched thousands of lives. As years passed, the impact of their work grew exponentially. Stories poured in from exonerees who had regained their freedom thanks to reforms sparked by their advocacy. Families reunited, dreams reignited, and communities healed, all proof that change was possible when people dared to confront hard truths. Marcus often reflected on how far he'd come, marveling at the ripple effect of one man's fight for justice. Holloway, meanwhile, found peace in knowing he had used his privilege to amplify voices that might otherwise have gone unheard. In the end, their journey wasn't just about redemption, it was about connection. Marcus and Holloway proved that even those divided by circumstance could find common ground through shared humanity. They showed the world that mistakes didn't define a person. What mattered was how they responded to them. And they reminded everyone that justice wasn't something handed down from above. It was something built from below, brick by brick, heart by heart. Years later, when asked what kept him going during the darkest days, Marcus smiled softly and said, "Hope. Not just for me, but for everyone still waiting for their chance to be free." Standing beside him, Holloway nodded in agreement, adding, "And belief in the possibility of change, no matter how long it takes." Together, they embodied the enduring power of hope and the unshakable strength of the human spirit.